Good evening, class. Imagine a child that cannot speak or respond to corrective learning. Imagine the frustration of never hearing the words "I'm sorry" or "I love you." Imagine that same child never being able to grow up and survive on its own without a parent. This is the burden of parents whose children suffer from the worst case of autism. This is also a burden that's becoming more prevalent in the United States. This evening, I'd like to inform you about the rise of autism in the United States by briefly describing autism, detailing some significant events, and finally addressing how early intervention and research techniques have increased the number of documented autism cases. Again, in order to understand the rise of autism, one should know a little bit about autism. So let me begin by briefly describing autism. What is autism? During my research, I never found a concise definition of autism. However, I did find some descriptions, and I'd like to go over 3 of the descriptions I found. First, according to Bing.com, autism is a disturbance in psychological development in which the use of language, reaction to stimuli, and interpretation of the world and formation of relationships are not fully established and follow unusual patterns. Second, according to the Autism Speaks online webpage, autism is a general term for a brain disorder. And lastly, according to the Department of Health and Human Services Interagency Autism Committee's online webpage, autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is characterized by impairing verbal and nonverbal communication skills and social interactions, and restricted, repetitive, and stereotype patterns of behavior ranging in impact from mild to significantly disabling. So as you can tell, there's only some descriptions of autism. Autism is only kind of described through a series of characteristics. So one might ask themselves, how did the term autism become so prevalent in the United States? Well, let me tell you or detail some significant historical events that might help answer this question. Again, during my research, I found so many significant events that I'll not be able to cover each and every one in my speech. However, I would like to cover 3 events that, in my opinion, had the greatest significance to discovery and acknowledgement of autism. First, according to an article by Dr. Edward Yazbek, a Dr. Leo Kanner, while at Johns Hopkins, was the first to describe autism in 1943. Second, according to Autism Society's own webpage, Dr. Bernard Rimland, with the help of Dr. Ruth Sullivan and many parents of children with autism, founded the American Autism Society in 1965. This society became the leading information on autism and spearheaded my final significant event, legislative law. My final significant event was the passage of the Public Law 109-416, or the 2006 Combating Autism Act. While these 3 significant events led to an increase in the discovery and acknowledgement of autism, perhaps the most significant contribution to documenting autism comes in my final point: how early intervention and research techniques have led to the increased autism documented cases. Early intervention and research techniques have led to the increase of documented autism cases in 3 specific ways. First, according to Dr. Edward Yazbek, early intervention comes by way of education. In fact, he states that the Individual with Disabilities Act of 1975 significantly helped increase early intervention by requiring state and local education districts to provide a free, appropriate public education based on individual programs, individual education programs, geared to each student's needs. Also, the U.S. Department of Education was mandated to report yearly to Congress. At first, there were few cases of autism documented or reported under the IDEA. Then, in 1991, due to the rising number of reported cases, U.S. schools decided to list autism as a separate entity. Here's a chart shown by the U.S. Department of Education's annual report to Congress. It shows the number of children diagnosed with autism attending public schools. Even though this chart is dated, it is still significant contribution to the increased number of documented cases through early intervention. Basically, it shows the number of students with autism by the thousands, ages 6 to 21. In 1991 through 1992, it shows the number of documented cases to be 5,400. In 2002 and 2003, it shows the number of documented cases to be 118,600. Although the education system through early intervention has played a role in documentation, research techniques has also played a major role. The 2006 Combating Autism Act basically caused the initiation of the Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee to be established or initiated. They required special research so that they could report the number of autism cases to Congress. This specialized and often new research came by way of the Center for Disease Control, or CDC. According to the CDC's online webpage, they documented the number of cases in 2006 to be 1 in 100 children in the U.S. had autism. Then, because of significant research and documented studies, the most recent documentation shows an increased number of cases to be 1 in 88. This is a 23% increase from 2006 to 2008. Overall, through early intervention and research, the number of documented cases is growing. These growing numbers have directly contributed to the establishing the rise of autism in the U.S. So today I've talked to you a little bit about what is autism. I've detailed some significant historical events, and finally I've addressed how early intervention and research have increased the number of documented autism cases. In conclusion, you know how I like to tell stories. Well, I'd like to tell you this story. My son is 7 and my niece is 9. When my niece was 2 years old, she was diagnosed, with autism. Today, my son can put on his own clothes, get out and put on his own clothes. He can pretty much make his own breakfast, and he can go to the bathroom without telling me. My niece can't do any of these. My son can tell me when he's not feeling well. All my niece can do is cry, and we have to figure out where it is she's hurting or take her to the doctor. I know that my son will one day be able to grow up, and he'll be able to survive without me. my niece will always need her parents to survive. I think one of the most hardest things for me to get over is that my niece lives in a different world that seems dark and depressive. But I know with the rising number of documented cases in the United States, maybe, just maybe, her world will change. Thanks. Have a good evening.